Welcome to the studio here at Illinois Public Media. I'm Sarah Edwards. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, this studio was a centerpiece of our local TV production. We produced weekly episodes of Mid-American Gardener here, filmed interviews and panels, and made special programming like Illinois Country Live. And let's not forget about our WILL fundraising drives. They're also produced right here in this studio. Now, as you can imagine, it got a little lonely here starting in March of 2020 when the pandemic began. But we're happy to say we're back, and we thought we'd celebrate the holiday season and jumpstart WILL's 100th year coming in 2022 by inviting some of the artists and artisans you may have seen in our classical BTS and American Portrait series into the studio to talk to us about how they fared during the pandemic and to perform for you. Because even though a global pandemic might shut down studios and concert halls, artists always find a way to make their own kind of music.
This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it
That was Dr. Ollie Watts Davis singing This Little Light of Mine. We met Dr. Davis, as she's known to her students, in September of 2020 as she was navigating the realities of teaching during a global pandemic.
Good evening, everyone. Are you guys as wonderful as you look? Yes? Okay, that makes me feel good.
I am Dr. Ollie Watts Davis. I am the Suzanne and William Allen Distinguished Professor of Music. I serve as a professor of voice and the music director and conductor of the Black Chorus at the University of Illinois. The students come to Illinois from a variety of places and with a variety of interests, but when they come to Black Chorus, they come for that experience with the students, but they also come for an experience with me.
She always says this, that she's teaching us transferable skills.
The storm is passing over, the storm is passing, come on.
That everything that she wants to teach us, she wants us to be able to apply it in our other classes, in work, in future, or just to, have it in our pockets.
Encourage your neighbor, come on, lean over.
Take time to learn all that you can and prepare during this time, because when we come out on the other side, and we will come out on the other side, I want for you to be ready for the needs that you're presented with. There will be those who will need what you have mastered during this time of solitary and solitude. There will be those who have questions that you can answer if you prepare yourself now.
Don't you feel better?
Dr. Ollie Watts Davis joins me now in the studio. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Sarah, for having me.
So in the clip we just saw, which we shot about a year ago, you were talking about how you were encouraging your students to really use the restrictions of the pandemic to grow as people. So cut to a year later, we're now a year later, what are the major lessons you've learned since the pandemic began, and how have they helped you to grow and change as an artist and an educator?
Well, thank you for that question. And I want to start by saying I give good advice. So you said I've encouraged the students to use the restrictions to grow. And so during this time, I've encouraged myself to use the restrictions or the margins that have been placed in my life to actually grow and flourish. And so I've matured quite a bit, and I'm pleased with it, actually. I've been able to close some doors, and with the closing of certain doors, other doors have opened. And so I know oftentimes I have a tendency to over-program myself. So during this pandemic, as I had encouraged the students to do, kind of reframe the restrictions in some sort of ways and not see them as hindering you, but actually giving you an opportunity to focus, prioritize, and choose wisely. And that's what I've tried to do.
Well, one of the things that really impressed us when we were shooting American Portrait was, one of the biggest things that you chose to do, obviously, you chose to hold rehearsals in person during the height of the pandemic, and what went along with that was wearing masks, and it's so tough to sing and rehearse in masks. So how did you adjust to that? I mean, because I assume you're still kind of doing that to some extent, and how did you encourage the kids to stay musical while you were having to sing in masks?
Sure. Well, the mask actually became just another teaching tool. And so we were able to get a proper mask for singing that had a little more space, and students were able to really work on their enunciation and articulation and placement and projection. So it really assisted in actually the phonation and actually the singing process, which was good. And as I said earlier, sometimes you have to reframe things that appear to be challenges, and you have to see the inherent good in it. And so in order to not have a diminished experience as part of Black Chorus, or even with my students in my studio, we just had to use the tools that were available to us. And so the mask became a tool for us to use. And the students were so happy to gather in person. And yes, I wanted to have an in-person as well as online experience for the students. And I think that they would have worn hoods or whatever was necessary just to kind of come together, because that really added to their human experience. And they were able to give value to one another as they were receiving value from that experience.
So, we've kind of seen in the artistic community that the pandemic can really, it kind of divided artists into two camps, and maybe not, but generally we see that artists could be either creatively crippled by the restrictions of a pandemic, or it was just a chance for them to be more creative than they had in a long time. So, tell me about some of the creative projects that you brought to life during the pandemic, and what you have going on now with Black Chorus and your career.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Yes, we are sensitive people. We're artists. And so, things impact us in many different ways. And I think our first response can be like, what are we going to do? But then I think shortly after just basically owning that reality, many of us engaged. And we decided that the art that's within us has to come forth. And so, as you mentioned, my work with Black Chorus continued. We were very, very productive and really pleased about that. Personally, I was able to curate a recital program that means so very much to me. It's called Toward Justice and Shared Humanity, the Art Songs of Black Americans as Lens, Language, Voice, and Hope. And so I've had the great privilege to sing that recital across the country, actually, and hold a question and response after the recital. And it basically addresses the things that are on my heart as are very important right now, and how I can best serve my generation with, justice and equity and things like that. So in the future, I will continue to present this recital and curate other recitals like that. Black Chorus will continue to have now in-person performances. And I want to say this, yes, I conduct the choir and it's my passion, it's really dear to my heart, but I have some really outstanding voice students in my studio. And I just have to give a shout out to 3 of my graduate students from last year, because during this pandemic, one master's student was finishing her degree, which included a scholarly paper as well as preparing a degree recital. And it was amazing. During a pandemic, during voice lessons online, and with few rehearsals in another large space. My doctoral student finished her doctorate degree during the pandemic. And so I'm so proud of them. And another doctoral student did her first degree recital and went off and competed and earned a professional performance during the pandemic. So I think I said earlier, if the art is in you, you will find a way to bring it out.
The holiday season is prime time for pipe organs, which is an instrument you may not think about much normally. John Paul Buzard has established a reputation as one of the finest builders of pipe organs in the world, and he builds every one of them right here in Champaign-Urbana with his staff. Fred Barr is a key member of his team. Fred's responsible for crafting the tone each pipe produces. Here's a clip from Season 2 of Classical BTS about the Buzard Pipe Organ Company.
There are so many different aspects of the craft of organ building. You have to be an electrician, a plumber, a musician, a woodworker, and a metal worker, and so on and so on. So I have brought together the best people that I can find that are experts in all of these different areas in order to be able to build the kind of instruments of the quality that we do. For everybody that's in this field, they've come to it because they've gotten bitten by the bug. And sometimes they get bitten later in life, and sometimes they get bitten as I was, as a child. What a pipe organ is a box of whistles. And the speech of those whistles are controlled by keys that an organist plays. We order all of our metal pipes from a pipe maker in Germany. They're absolutely the most beautiful organ pipes in the world.
John Paul Buzard and Fred Barr join me here in the studio now. Great to have you both here.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
John Paul, you kind of supervise the day-to-day operations of the Buzzard Pipe Organ Company. But Fred, you have a really fascinating job. Tell us more about what you do.
I'm sort of in charge of making the sounds that the organ makes. I take the pipes that don't speak at all when we get them, and we cut and adjust and do various things to make them sing their song, as it were. It's kind of a mixture of physics of getting the pipe actually to produce sound, but there's also the emotional side of it, of trying to imagine what that effect is going to be on the people who listen to it. So I get to combine those two things in the job that I do.
And I think a lot of people say, well, there's one tone to a particular pipe, and I think what was fascinating about when we did this piece is that tones are a range of sound. Tell me a little bit more about.
Well, they're very, very complex, actually. There's the beginning and the end, but then the sustained sound in the middle of that has lots of overtones that give it the color and the character that it has. And that's all of those things that can be adjusted with minute little adjustments that we make, cutting metal or sticking a knife in here or there, adjusting things.
Excellent. Tell me, both of you, how your jobs and how business in general has been affected by the pandemic.
Well, I can certainly speak to the organ building industry and our company. When the lockdown here in Illinois began, we had already brought our crew back home from installation in Omaha. And so they all came back because there was an outbreak in Omaha. They all came back, quarantined for 2 weeks. Everyone was fine. And then the state shut us down for 3 months. So we basically got no work done for 3 months. And we're supposed to deliver an organ in 2 years' time. Fortunately, the church is more than understanding, and it doesn't matter if the organ comes late, but you have a very, very real risk of running out of money before you're done. So fortunately, in the long term, the pandemic has been a giant pain in the behind, but we're catching up. Sorry, I could have said worse, but we are catching up, and we'll catch up by the end of the organ that we're building now for the church in Nashville.
Tell me a little bit about how you balance the science and the emotion of building an organ. Because Fred, you're knee deep in tones all day, but I imagine, John, that clients approach you saying, "We want the most majestic, beautiful organ we can possibly create for this space." So, do those goals always match?
Go ahead.
No, they don't always match. But we have been very fortunate to have clients that have said they don't want the biggest, that kind of quantitative sort of thing. They want the best in their space for the worship that they do. We've been very, very fortunate about that. There are, however, a lot of organists out there, and I don't think that you'll need to correct me, but who will say, "Oh, I've just got to have an organ with 4 keyboards or 3 keyboards," whereas the church that he or she is playing in might only really need a 2-manual organ. And that's kind of where you have to educate about science and art coming together. And yes, we can certainly build you something huge, but we don't want it to be so big that it's cumbersome and that it might be too loud, or frankly so big that it swallows itself up with the sound.
Now, tell me a little bit about the major project you have underway in Nashville.
It's for St. George's Episcopal Church, and they have probably one of the most enviable music programs in the Episcopal Church in the United States. Their instrument is currently going to be 55 stops, 65 independent sets of pipes, with the provision to be able to add more in the future. As it is, it's a good-sized organ, and it will take care of their musical needs for a good long time. But it has challenged us. It's a long build. Usually an organ will take a year in the shop, maybe a year and a quarter. Well, this is 2.25 years in the shop alone. And our shop, we've been in it for 32 years, and it used to be a hotel for unmarried women, and we've had to modify it as much as we can. And what we call the erecting room, where you're supposed to be able to set the whole thing up, we can only set a quarter of it up at a time. So we're doing it in quadrants. And our production director, Shane Rhodes, and his assistant, Mike Meyer, have been incredibly clever as to how we can set each of those up individually, but then they will join perfectly when you put them into the church. We're on the second quadrant now. We expect to have the third one up by Christmas.
We've produced both seasons of Classical BTS with an ongoing gift from a very generous donor. And really, your donations, big and small, allow us to continue producing high-quality documentaries and series here at WILL. Here's a bit of information about how you can give and where you can watch our Classical BTS and American Portrait series.
Hi, I'm Erin Lippitz, Major Gifts Director at Illinois Public Media. WILL is the source for classical music in our community every single day on WILL FM and WILL TV. Classical BTS was produced right here at WILL, and gifts from viewers like you make original series like this possible. You can help support locally produced, high-quality documentaries and series by making a gift today. Call 217-244-9455 or go online to willgive.org and support this station. Find all the episodes of Classical BTS and the American Portrait Central Illinois series on our website at will.illinois.edu. Click on Watch, select the show, and enjoy.
Pursuing a career as a professional harpist is, well, let's just face it, more of a rare thing in classical music. But Julia K. Jameson is making her own major mark as a harpist by combining her roots in classical harp literature with her own contemporary style. She's a harp teacher and an innovative composer and arranger of harp music. Here's a quick look at Julia's career from Season 1 of Classical BTS.
I was introduced to the harp at a wedding. I heard it played at a wedding, and it was so big and weird to me that I thought, oh, this is cool, I have to do that. And so I marched up to the bride, who was the harpist, and asked her for harp lessons. There wasn't really a point when I knew like this was what I wanted to do. I always knew it was sort of expected. Everybody was like, oh, Julia's gonna be a harpist. You know, in grad school, I sort of found my own voice, became more confident, and I could really play a lot of notes at once, and so I started experimenting with playing the kind of music that I wanted to play. Like one of the first pieces that I arranged was Michael Jackson's Thriller, and I decided to do it for 4 harps. From there, I arranged a ton of popular pieces for harp quartet, but then after a while I decided to start writing my own original stuff, and I use experimental sounds, and you can put an alligator clip onto a harp string and flick it, and it vibrates and tremolos, or you can pluck the string with an alligator clip on it and it sounds like a old clock. Go to a hardware store and pick up anything that looks neat and try it on a harp.
Julia Jameson joins us here in the studio. Nice to have you here.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about how you adjusted personally and professionally to the onset of the pandemic. How did it affect your ability to improvise and your creativity?
Well, the biggest change was having to do so much online because of live performances sort of disappearing almost overnight. I had to figure out ways to connect with audiences and connect with my students entirely online. And so I had to get a little creative with that. And
Well, the other thing is, harp is such a, it's a very detailed instrument. I imagine it's very hard to teach a student the intricacies of harp playing on Zoom. I mean, how did you put your camera real close to the strings? And I mean, how do you handle that?
yes, we have the cameras really close, so a good view of the strings and the hands. It's hard to catch every little thing, but in some ways it's interesting because I can ask students things like, how do you feel about that? How's your posture? Like, what are your feet doing right now? And so it helps them to be a little more self-aware too when I have to rely on them.
Did anything that you experienced or learned over the pandemic really stick with you? Like, this is something I'm going to take forward into my own life once this is all kind of past.
I love teaching so much. And I think even over the Zoom format, I really loved teaching and I loved connecting with my students. And so I think looking forward, that's a focus for me and something that's really important to me, and I want to keep it that way.
I'm curious also about the state of opportunities for people who want to pursue a career as a harpist today. Is it with the advent, not the advent, but the, social media, is it expanding opportunities for harpists, things you can do as a harpist?
I'm curious, probably. We'll see how it all plays out. I do think it's wonderful. I picture some young harpist in a small town posting some creative, amazing thing that they've done on social media and finding an audience that can really appreciate and support them. And I think that probably goes a long way in encouraging a young harpist and getting them out into the world. So I think that's a great part of social media.
You're going to play two pieces for us, one which we may know, and the other one is completely improvised. So one of the things I'm really curious about is, even though it's an improvised piece, there must be some kind of structure behind how you approach improvisation. Can you take me into your mind a bit about how you approach an improvised piece?
In the classical piece that I'm going to play, it's interlude from the Ceremony of Carols. And the interlude itself is based on a Gregorian chant that is also used in the Ceremony of Carols. And so I'm going to improvise loosely based on that same Gregorian chant. And so I'll have that in mind as I play. And then I also have in mind that I want to use a couple of extended techniques. And so I have that planned in advance, but how it unfolds, I have no idea.
Yes, okay, all right. I know we said it was a holiday edition of Classical BTS, but we thought you might enjoy a bit of school spirit thrown in for good measure. That was John Paul Buzard playing the Illinois Fight Song at the Chapel of St. John the Divine in Urbana. Now here again for a final performance is Dr. Ollie Watts Davis. Dr. Davis, please introduce us to your pianist and tell us about your final song.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce to you my friend and my colleague, Dr. Casey Robards, at the piano. For our final selection, we will sing He's Got the Whole World in His Hand, arranged by Margaret Bonds.
He's got the whole world in his hand. 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 He's got the woods and the waters in his hand. He's got the woods and the waters in his hand. He's got the sun and the moon right in his hand. He's got the whole world in his hand. He's got the birds and the bees right in his hand. He's got the birds and the bees right in his hand. He's got the beasts of the field right in his hand. He's got the whole world in his hand. He's got you and me right in his hand. He's got you and me right in his hand. He's got everybody in his hand. He's got the whole world in his hand. He's got the whole world in his hand.
Once again, Julia K. Jamieson. We leave you with a special performance from one of our own, so to speak. Julia Escobar grew up in Texas and fell in love with the flute when she was in 4th grade. After college in Texas, she came to the University of Illinois for her master's degree and is now finishing her PhD in flute performance. Julia is Illinois Public Media's very first John Frayne Classical Music Fellow. It's a new position here made possible with a gift to the University of Illinois and to Illinois Public Media. She's been hard at work curating a special edition of Prairie Performances for our radio listeners that showcases music for the flute. Enjoy this final performance. I'm Sarah Edwards, and from all of us here at Illinois Public Media, happy holidays.